All right, let's talk about consciousness a little bit. I just had Sam Harris on. We've talked about it quite extensively. I think you have some thoughts on consciousness, the nature of consciousness.
Indeed, yeah. I mean, it's probably, to do this right, we would need to agree on a definition, and I'm not sure that any definition that we choose will immediately antagonize some amount of your audience
right.
in
this
a
is like
not
defining,
productive way.
This is like defining truth, which semes to be tough these days as well.
Yes, exactly. So maybe rather than that, are humans the only conscious beings on this planet? I don't think so, but we are the most conscious. We are the most fully conscious. And we have better access to our own consciousness, obviously, than we have access to the consciousness of, say, dolphins or elephants or other apes or maybe wolves. Any of these long-lived social organisms with long childhoods and generational overlap who lived sometimes with 3 generations together at a time, so there's transmission of cultural information, organisms that have theory of mind and can imagine, can put themselves in the other individual's position and think, what do they think is going on right now, even though I understand that that's a different thing than what I think is going on right now.
Right, which we now know that certain monkeys and apes do that.
Yes,
yeah.
Theory of mind. I mean, there's a beautiful book called Baboon Metaphysics by the husband and wife team Cheney and Seyfarth that basically explores theory of mind in baboons. And it's not the only one. They're not the only species. But how do we as humans find our consciousness best? There are ways that we can hack into what has sometimes been called flow states, or that's the most common one. But we can do so through deep conversation, through meditation, through music. Sometimes through producing it, but sometimes through experiencing, especially live music. Dance for some people, hallucinogens, sex, sport, intense physical or physiological or emotional experience in which we are just moving with others, usually. And there are those of us, like myself, a very strong introvert, who will find some of my deepest flow states, access to consciousness alone. Alone in the Amazon when I can sit and watch monkeys and write. That, for me, that's one of them. But sport is also.
So when I talked about this with Sam, the way he was defining it, which I think is sort of similar to what you're saying here, it strikes me as just like an extreme ability to maintain presence in the moment. That really sort of, when a basketball player, so if we use the sport analogy, like a basketball player when they're in the zone, and Jordan scores 20 points in 5 minutes and he always said, well, everything I threw up just went in, like that they hit that level of consciousness. Or for you, to be outside, enough out of yourself to be able to write in that perfect moment or whatever else, that it always seems about being present more than anything else to me.
There is a kind of time stopping, both time stopping and disappearing on you at the same time, which I think is part of why entheogens, hallucinogens, can capture that as well, because the sense of time just disappearing on you is remarkable. So you both don't care about time, and time passes usually in ways that seem quicker than you were expecting them to, with say sport or meditation. That's not one that I do, but Sam has a lot to say about that, of course.
I remember when I was doing mushrooms, at least sort of in college age, somewhat consistently, maybe every 6 months or something, I would always want the clocks to be covered.
Yes.
Because I hated the, and mirrors are no good. I definitely did one trip like 5 hours in a mirror, forget that. Yeah. But I always wanted the clocks to be covered because the idea that time was passing while I was in this state was very scary to me.
No, that's
scary, or just, I just wanted nothing to do with it, I guess.
Right, and it's, maybe it doesn't matter what that distinction is, scary or just not interested, right? But, so it's very different. The kinds of consciousness-enhancing activities that we can engage in, including hallucinogens, are very different if you're inside in a room like this where you have no access to what is going on climatologically or weather-wise outside, as opposed to if you are out and you can watch as the sun sets and as the moon comes up, and you can think again, oh right, it's it's a waxing moon. It'll be full in 4 days, and or you're at a coast and you can watch the tides and think about the shifting time. So for me, thinking about time that is clearly being revealed by the planet we're on, as opposed to coming at me through a clock, is more meaningful. And I'm willing to think about time in that way, but definitely not through clocks when I'm writing hallucinogens, sport, any of that, right?
Right, and yet we have all of these devices now that are meant
Constantly
to
telling
suck
us.
our time,
Yes.
that are meant to take our attention, that are literally designed this way. Do you sense we're on, like, that there's actually a digital assault on consciousness? Because maybe that really does explain so many of the other problems we're having in society right now.
It's one of the key pieces for sure, and I think that phrase is brilliant, a digital assault on consciousness. This is something Tristan Harris, whom I don't know, but
yeah, I've had him on the show.
Yeah, talks about a lot, and he has been ringing the alarm bell for years about the algorithms that are being put into our devices that are creating addicts out of us.
Yeah.
But more broadly, the digital assault on consciousness is it's increasingly hard to find a space where you're just actually free and clear. And this is part of what I do for myself and what I used to do for my students, was take them to places not only that were remote and where they could explore nature, but where there was no cell signal, where there was no internet. So, the deepest part of the Amazon that I took students to, there's no email, there's no internet, there's no Wi-Fi. We are, a plane ride over the Andes, and then a boat ride, and then a truck ride, and then another 5 hours down a tributary of the Amazon to a place with no roads, no airstrips, nothing. And boy, does time feel different. And you're sleeping in little cabins that are screened, and so you wake up when the insects and the birds and the monkeys wake up and they start talking at you. They're not talking at you, they're talking to themselves, but you getting a sense of the rhythms of the planet that we're on can return people, I think, to a real sense of self, and also to a sense of what they value, what their passions are. And this is a big thing that I think is missing in many of to return to what we were talking about earlier, the far left activists, the control left, mostly, I think, lack another passion. And I've said before, the prediction I would make is that you have very few rock climbers or skiers among the radical left activists. People who have something that they can engage in that frees them from time and devices, from a response to time. I need to be here then, or my thing just pinged at me, I need to look at it, are better able to center themselves, to find their own consciousness and discover who they are and what they want to be in the world.
What does that say about the self, do you think? Like, to me, there's something there about, like, if you really believe in the self and the individual and your ability to overcome things, you don't need all these external processes to help define the world, because you're sort of defining it yourself.
I agree. And I do think, for me, self-sufficiency is one of my highest values, personally. And I have a very hard time understanding anyone who says, oh, if you leave me on my own, I wouldn't know what to do. Like, I just don't get this. I don't get why you would
Maybe it's a lefty thing. I'd be fine too. Yeah.
Why would you broadcast to the world that you would be helpless? This doesn't make any sense to me. But, and there are plenty of situations where I wouldn't know what to do, and I would know what to do in situations that most people wouldn't, just because of where I've traveled and where I've lived. But the idea that self-sufficiency the idea that you want to be self-sufficient requires a concept of self, I think is important here. Yeah, maybe that.
Yeah, and if you give that up, well then, boy, you're giving up a lot.
You give up so much, and the devices, as Tristan Harris has argued, are addicting us. It's no accident. We should not view ourselves actually as weak. When we get addicted to the things, we should wean ourselves. We should, as much as possible, to provide ourselves zones, periods of time when we have no access to those things, and so we are actually free and clear to let our minds do what they will. Because when they have access to our brains, they are designed to addict us.
So using the discipline that you're an expert in, is it possible that we're in a unique position right now because of technology that our brains are actually evolving now, or I guess devolving, depending on which way you look at it, at an extraordinarily high pace, or something like that, you know?
Yeah, the rate of change across almost every sector in the economy and in human experience right now is higher than it's ever been. Could you say that about any moment in history? Maybe. But the rate of change itself is changing
Right.
as well.
Right, so that's the important distinction.
Right. And what is going on with technology is completely untested. And so this is a place where, you know, why am I so certain that I'm still on the left, even though most of the people who say they're on the left publicly, I don't have any interest in continuing to talk to them because they don't seem to be making any sense. I look at systems that are evolved, that are in stable state because they've evolved over millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions of years. And my instinct is, don't mess with that until you really, really understand what you're doing. And so, for instance, I, unlike many scientists, am not feeding my children GMOs. Mm-hmm. I give them and myself organic food, and when we eat meat, which we do a lot of, I want that meat to have been fed the grass of the food of its ancestors. Mm-hmm. What exactly is the harm? We now know a little bit of this, but 20 years ago, if you had asked me, what's the harm in feeding cows grains? I said, I have no idea. But I know that messing with a system that was working is more likely to interfere with something in that animal than not. Mm-hmm. Why would you mess if you could not? And of course there are economic reasons to mess, but the don't mess with systems that are working until you really have a solid understanding of what the effects are going to be. The use of the precautionary principle pretty widely is what puts me pretty far on the left. But systems that we've created that are evolutionary, but people don't know that, we need to regulate in order to get them under control, because nuclear energy isn't going to regulate itself. And habitat loss throughout most of the world is not going to regulate itself. So there are some problems that we've created and that are bigger than individuals can do anything about. And that's why I'm not a libertarian.
Yeah, right. Right, and this is where I think we have I get it. Like, I don't know that if you just leave everybody to do whatever the hell they want all the time, that everybody isn't going to be doing all sorts of awful things. I think generally the market does fix some of that, but I get what you're saying. Like, these systems are, I suppose, often precarious in nature too, right, to the point where anything could be tilted one way or the other, and then we've got bigger problems.
Right.
So how do we fix some of this stuff? How do we actually scale this back? I mean, I get it, most of my audience will get, okay, well, we have to keep talking about it, sure, and we have to wake more people up, sure. But what can you do using the knowledge you have and the study you've done?
I have less insight right now, at least to answer in this amount of time, for the adult systems. But I think I have a fair amount of clarity on what we should be doing with children and with parenting that we're really, really not doing, which is...
When you say the adult systems, you mean like economic systems? And
well, and just like, and more specifically, how do you get adults who are already who they are to behave differently? It's less clear to me what we can do. And so,
okay, so we'll shelve them for the purposes of this. Yeah.
And and yes, also it's true that I have that I'm not going to wade into, for instance, what we should do about our economic system here now with you. I might do it later, but it's not going to happen today.
Okay.
But with regard to, for instance, most people I think have never thought about what childhood is. And if you don't have children yourself and you're an adult, okay, maybe you don't have to. Maybe it doesn't matter. Like, maybe it just doesn't matter to you. But if you're a parent, you need to think about why it is that we have literally the longest childhood relative to lifespan of any organism on the planet. This is a feature. This is a way for us to learn how to become humans. We are not, and this is a point that Brett has made very often, we're not blank slates, but we are the blankest slate of any organisms on the planet. We are more software than hardware. And so what we're doing for these first 11 to 25 years of our lives, right?
Now into the 40s, I think.
Right. But depending on culture, when do you start calling yourself an adult and all of this? What we're doing is learning how to be human. And we're learning how to be human by we're supposed to be learning how to be human through direct instruction by our parents, through observing our parents, through observing our siblings, through interacting with, including fighting with our siblings and having them smack us down, both sometimes literally, but definitely metaphorically when we do stupid things. And better yet, if our parents have lots of adult friends around and they have lots of kids, and there's a whole mess of humanity that we are learning from. And then we're also, in that very long developmental period, supposed to be learning from direct physical experience of the world. So the example I like to go to here is, the Roadrunner cartoons. When Wile E. Coyote scoots his way off a cliff, and he doesn't fall until he realizes there's nothing below him, it's funny, right? Like, it's really funny, but of course, it's funny because we know that gravity doesn't really work that way.
Right.
Increasingly, I suspect that a lot of kids, and now into
God.
iGen and some of the younger millennials, kind of aren't sure. Like, they were protected so much by their helicopter parents, and they were behind screens rather than having real experience. And to the extent that they played sport, it was totally regulated and overseen by adults. And they didn't have any free time to go and get themselves into trouble and maybe even like burn something down or hurt themselves or break an arm or whatever it is and learn from it. That they arrive at the cusp of what should have been adulthood, totally unclear on what that's supposed to mean.
Does this absolutely to you, because as I'm hearing you say that this is the bell going off in my head, man, I've been on tour with Peterson for the last 6 weeks. Everything that you just said there is basically what he is saying. He is trying to, I sense that what he's trying to do at the most personal level, yeah, he talks about society as a whole, but at the most personal level, he's trying to retool young people. It's not even retool. He's trying to give them the tools in the first place that they clearly should have gotten before.
Yeah.
So that's what's so fascinating to me, because it's like, how did this happen?
Right. How did this happen? And we can point to pharmaceuticals being given to kids to make boys less boy-like, and to some degree to make girls less girl-like. Let's give speed to boys, so they'll sit and face forward and learn what.
So they'll calm down.
They'll calm down and not do rough and tumble play. And I mean, that's insane.
Yeah.
And at the same time, let's give anti-anxiety meds to girls, and SSRIs, and just the model of schooling is ridiculous. We have schools that have gotten rid of recess because recess is dangerous. And everyone who's ever been in school, even if, like me, you happen to have been a good fit for the model of schools that you were in, which I think is pretty rare, actually, knows that you also need to have time to get out there and play and move your body and experience it, and not have it being overseen by some adult who's decided in advance what is and is not safe for you to experience. So one of the things I used to say to my students in advance, I did a lot of team building and actual team building and planning with them in advance of these long study abroad trips. We would have spent weeks together on campus in advance of going on these trips. But what I wanted to do before we left was establish with them, what's your relationship with risk? How do you view your relationship with risk? And we would do this in round, and I would answer the question too. And I would say to them, actually, I happen to love risk. I am the leader on this trip, but I will keep all of you safe, but then I'm going to go do things. And I am going to walk alone in the forest a lot and do things, because it happens to be one of the ways that I find my consciousness, that I find my truest self. And I don't expect any of you to do that also, but you need to be comfortable with the fact that your leader is going to be doing that sort of thing. And one of the other things that we would talk about was, what's your relationship with comfort? You're going to be uncomfortable. You're going to have to, just because you can say in advance you're okay with the bugs and the mud and the not having a phone, doesn't mean you actually will be when you're faced with it. But maybe most important is, we are going to leave ourselves open to serendipity. I cannot tell you everything that we are going to do or learn on this trip. If I could, what would be the point of going? We're going to go, and some interesting things are going to happen. I've had a couple of near-death experiences on these trips. I didn't want them. I did, I was.
There's a learning experience for you.
There's a learning experience, and frankly, on the most recent one, on a boat in the Galapagos with 8 students, in which the only thing that didn't survive was the boat, but it was really touch and go. I mean, I really did almost die. Those 8 students and I are friends for life. right? There's some of them that I'm not in active contact with, but I know where they are, and that that bonds you. And no, I'm not going to pitch a trip with, and you might die. That's not what the goal is, but the idea that it could happen, and you should have the tools on board, the physical tools, the psychological tools, the emotional tools, the intellectual tools, to figure out in real time, as your boat is being flipped by a 15-foot wave, and now you're trapped under it, what do you do?
Was that a uniquely evergreen type of teaching? Was that something that you and Brett really
That was a
brought
uniquely
there?
me kind of teaching, and then this last trip, Brett was there with me as well. There was a way in which I think what I said about childhood, which my interest originally in evolution was about the evolution of parental care and territoriality and social systems and sexual selection. And long before I ever had kids myself, long before I wanted kids. But I thought, once Brett and I did have kids, and I'm watching these amazing creatures begin to grow up, okay, let's think then about what is the best way to do this. And we could put them in little boxes and make absolutely sure that they survive till the age of 18. And then we open up the boxes and we let them out, and they have basically no chance of being adults, or even of knowing how to be adults. Or we could expose them to ever greater risk, having first made absolutely sure that they know that they are loved and that we have their backs and that we will do anything to come in and get them and to protect them if we can. But that they are going to start going out into the world pretty early, biking at 2. And, we took them to the Amazon at 7 and 9 the first time. And, something could have gone wrong. And I don't know, I've known parents who lost kids, and I don't know how you survive that. But you need to be willing to take risks such that when your kids do hit 18 or 20 or whatever, you know that they're actually already on their way to being adults. And that is going to require backing off and letting them do some of their learning on their own, and knowing that that's going to result in some harm coming to them. And it's going to be physical harm, it's going to be psychological harm, it's going to be intellectual harm. But frankly, the lack of any kind of harm that a lot of kids are experiencing is part of why they're now saying speech is violence.
Yeah.
Right? I mean, that's part of how we get there.
Is some of this an extension of the success of the West in a way? Because if you take this set of kids, however old they are, let's say we go from, although now there's a lot of studies that are showing that the generation younger than millennials is actually leaning more conservative. But let's say we take 16 to 30 roughly, so generation Y-ish. That most of their parents were baby boomers who were the most successful, at least financially, generation ever. Most of the baby boomers' parents all went to war and lived through depression and all sorts of stuff. But that because the baby boomers basically were the biggest middle class, and because there was such upward mobility, they had it so well, they kind of got their eye off the ball, started focusing on things that didn't matter as much, protecting kids from things that a kid would have used to have to have done, and that is sort of what led us here. So it's almost like an economic backing for what ended up happening psychologically.
Yeah, I think that's apt. There's so many things feeding into this, and yes, the wealth of America post-World War II, and the fact that those are mostly the parents of the generation that seems the most confused. I think definitely there's a causal link there.
Yeah, and then you toss in the internet.
And you toss in the internet, right? Which, we can't go back, obviously, but we need to understand that it's an evolutionary system and that it's going to run away from us, and that we are all prone to be addicted to dopamine hits. We're going to seek the quick likes, rather than, even, okay, so take internet out of the picture for a moment. If I don't know what you do for physical activity. I bike. You play basketball.
There you go.
So maybe with basketball it's going to be different. For me,
I like video games too. Is that better?
No. That's probably the opposite.
Okay.
Yeah, probably the opposite. But so I used to play a lot of ultimate frisbee, and you could any time there was a pickup game, I'm there. I was playing 5-6 times a week for a while, and then I ruptured my Achilles tendon playing on an Oregon beach with students a few years ago, and I'm not doing that anymore.
Yeah.
But biking, which I love and I find meditative, I have a very hard time convincing myself to get on my bike. even though while I'm doing it, I love it. And after I do it, I feel better, and I'm more productive, and I'm more creative, and I just am, more in love with life. But it's a pain in the ass, and it's a little bit physically uncomfortable, and all of these things are true. We prioritize the pleasure of now over even something that, for me, I know it's not even that I'm going to feel better after I did it. I actually love the activity itself, but getting over that sort of activation energy to do the thing, and I suspect that sport, like actual team sports, is a little bit different.
It's a little different. Like you're ready to go.
You're ready to go.
Yeah.
Like, oh, people are there. I'm ready. Let's do this.
But going to the gym, I would liken to that. Like, I know that when I work out, I like doing it, and I feel great after. But it's like, oh, I got to get in my car. I got to drive over there. I got to park, and blah blah blah.
Feels like a chore.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But yet you know it's good, and yet so we're always fighting our nature, sort of.
We are. No, exactly. We're always fighting our nature, and it shouldn't surprise us that we're going to need to fight our nature with regard to responding to the internet and responding to especially the little computers we carry around in our pockets, and learning to restrict our access to those, training ourselves to restrict our access to those. And I think anyone with the ability to train themselves to meditate or to do anything on a regular basis should be able to train themselves that same way with regard to devices.
Yeah. All right. Well, we've done about an hour here, and I'm going to demand that you come back, because I know we can do way more of this. Unfortunately, just because my schedule is so nuts at the moment, we have to kind of stop. But can you give me one more thing that you're just really excited about right now, that you've been thinking about or working on, or anything else that's really just giving you a little bit of juice at the moment while you're in this interesting space for yourself?
Well, there are a number of things. I guess there's a piece I wrote a number of years ago that is supposed to be out in a literary magazine just about now-ish, about having been mugged at knife point in Quito, on one of these study abroad trips, which prompted, and I was with 3 students.
Where's Quito?
The capital of Ecuador.
Oh, okay.
So it was before the first day of one of my 6-week study abroad trips. So 20 students, just me. Brett wasn't there on this one. And the experience in which we'd been together, the 3 students and I have been together all day. We come to the top of the stairs, and suddenly 2 guys with knives run around the corner and pin me and my female student up against a wall and do this sort of knife dance in front of us, and then relieve. I didn't have anything on me because I know how to walk around Latin American cities, and one of my students didn't, but 2 of my students had all of their stuff taken off of them, including this really nice DSLR that Michelle, my student, had. And they run off. And the next thing I realize, I am on one of these guys in the middle of the street, pulling on the backpack he's stolen from another one of my students. Another one of my students has chased down the other guy.
Wow.
And I thought, how did that happen? And why is everything now so loud and so colorful? And I thought back immediately, wow, the entire experience that I just had was somehow in black and white and was without sound. And so, I mean, it's an interesting long story that I basically explored in this essay by going and doing a dive into the literature on the nature of memory, on the nature of sensory memory in particular, and what it is that we can and cannot perceive in the moment, what our brains take in, why time seems to slow down. So just to go back to our early conversation about time, why time seems to slow down in periods of intensity. It's not that time slows down, but basically our frame rate increases. And not only our frame rate increases, but the amount that we remember and move into short-term memory, and then in this case into long-term memory increases. So this is one of the things that I've been thinking about lately, is sort of how memory and the senses, and in fact how all of us are a little bit of synesthetes, are experiencing our world in ways that we don't usually have language for.
Not that it was the purpose of the story, but how did this all end?
It ended, we got the stuff back.
Wow.
We got the stuff back, and as soon as the student Jeremy and I gave chase to these guys and got the stuff back, then the police showed up. Then the police Dopplered up from behind, and the whole
They were waiting, they were watching.
It was remarkable, actually. It was there was no one on this walk. We'd seen no one. These 2 guys run up to us, mug us, run off, we give chase, and then the entire neighborhood comes alive. Suddenly there were hundreds of people there. Like, where were you guys? Anyway.
There's some sort of study to be done on that. Well, I'm sure they've done studies on that, you know, when people see
Yes.
the bad thing happening, but nobody calls the police and all that kind of stuff. Well, listen, it's been an absolute pleasure. I'm so glad that we finally got to do this
Indeed.
in person, and we will do it again. And you guys can follow Heather on the Twitter. She does tweet a decent amount, but not a unhealthy, addicted amount, I would say. It's at Heather E. Hying.